What's up, everybody? Welcome to my new podcast called The Jazz Drummer's Blueprint. This is a podcast where I'm going to be interviewing jazz drummers and talking about their journey in jazz drums. So this is episode 1, and it features the great young Canadian jazz drummer, Jacob Wutzke. Roll the intro. Before we get started, I'd also like to mention my new teaching program course called The Jazz Drummer's Blueprint. Same name, branding, how about that? So what it is it's a program that's really designed to help you achieve your jazz and really your drumming goals. It's not just jazz, but mostly focused on jazz. We're going to use a step-by-step curriculum and take all the complexity of the internet and all this stuff and all the information and boil it down and make it work for you so that you can become a better drummer, so that you can get out there and play with the people that you want to play with, so that you can be happier and healthier and all that stuff. And yes, the Jazz Drummer's Blueprint. Click the link below and find out more. I'd love to talk to you. All right, let's get on with the interview. Well, we're here with Jacob Wutzke, and first, before we dive into what we're going to be talking about, Jacob, can you just introduce yourself and tell the world about who you are and what you do?
Sure, Tim. Well, thank you for having me on here. And yeah, my name is Jacob Wutzke. I'm a Canadian jazz drummer and music educator. I'm based in Montreal, but you'll see me traveling a lot, especially in Canada and a little bit in the US as well. And as you know, I'm in the reasonably early stages of my career, I suppose, but I'm really proud of this following that I've garnered on the social media platforms, and I love to teach and to play music of all styles, but especially jazz drums has been my thing for the last few years or so. So
that's awesome. Where'd you go to school?
Yeah, I did my bachelor's degree at Humber College in Toronto, where I had some great teachers. I studied with Larnell Lewis and with Mark Kelso. Great. And then I did my master's degree at McGill University in Montreal, which is why I moved there. And I've been there for almost 4 years now.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
What would you say was, because you're awfully young, right? So, compared to me now.
27, yeah.
But what got you into playing jazz?
Yeah, I didn't have like a school that had a terribly strong music program, but I did get into it early, which was nice. I was 13 years old, I think grade 8, when I had the opportunity to join my first jazz band, which is very early, at least up here in Canada. There's not a lot of programs like that. And it's not like we were really swinging, but I learned Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs, and I got a little bit of reading together, and I didn't know that much about it, but hearing that shuffle rhythm compared to the rock beats that I knew, I was like, oh, okay, there is another direction here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And from there, I have to credit YouTube, and to be honest, I remember stumbling across your videos very early on. I said, yeah, long-time fan. I said, yeah, and I keep coming back to them. But yeah, I remember listening to songs and just going through the YouTube recommendations. That's how I discovered Moanin' by Art Blakey, and then I discovered Moanin' by Charles Mingus, and I was like, oh, these are not the same song, and I tried to learn how to play both of them, and I think it's cool, and it's a story that I've heard a lot from people of my generation too. Just use the technology. The algorithm wants to feed us things that it thinks we'll like, which has its downsides, of course, but it did teach me a lot of new music at the beginning.
That's amazing. I'm 46, so I grew up in the Xennial generation, right? So we didn't have YouTube available to us, and I remember going out and buying box sets, like the Keith Jarrett Live at the Blue Note box set. I went out and bought that. It was almost $200 in the 90s, right?
Whoa.
So you'd listen to the music, right? And it was I remember going to Tower in New York and Tower Records in New York and fighting for with my jazz friends, and fighting for the one import record of Miles Davis from Tokyo that nobody could get, and it was there, and oh man, I'm gonna get this, and it was $30, and I'm like, oh man, it's $30, but I'm gonna do this, so our fight for the music was a lot different than what you guys have available, which is so weird.
It's heavy, yeah, and we talk about this all the time. We have all the music now, we can listen to anything, but really, you have to put a cap on it, I try my best not to listen to more than a couple albums at any one time and really soak it in. Everything I listen to, I try to listen to at least 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. Yeah, so that actually kind of goes into some other stuff too. You're a teacher, you're a fantastic teacher. I love the content that you put out on Instagram, and and all that. I'm not on TikTok because, you know, I don't know if you do TikTok, but primarily I know you through Instagram. So, but yeah, the information that you put out there is really incredible. How long have you been teaching? What got you into teaching?
Yeah, I mean, I've always liked it. I remember being in high school before it was actually a job or anything. I just, whenever I learned something, I would want to write it out and to show it to somebody, you know, to the people who were in a year younger than me in the school or whatever. And so I always had that inclination, and I feel like I have a bit of a natural gift in that sense of just the way I understand music is by breaking it up into small pieces, which happens to work well for teaching, you know what I mean? So, yeah, so it's, yeah, the way I understand it kind of goes that way. But since about 2018, I started teaching at a music studio. Yeah, and I love the art of it. I love the books and the resources that are already out there, and I like creating my own resources as well. Basically, whenever I have a student who has an issue that I don't really know how to address, I'll write a book about it. That seems to be my formula, you know. Addressing the actual issues that I'm seeing in my own playing or in the playing of my students.
Yeah.
And yeah, so where does that put me now? I mean, 6 years or so, it's been like a real part of my career.
That's fantastic. I think teaching's one of the most important things you can do to become better as a human and also as a musician too, because it forces you to think about things in so many different ways. Like you said, like you write books based on your students' problems, and I think that's incredible, you know? I do the same thing where, you know, if a student comes up with a problem, I'll answer it in the way that I normally answer it. And if I see that it's not clicking, then I'll have to use another analogy. And if that's not clicking, then I go on to this other one. And that's what's amazing, because then you have to think about the material inside and out and inside and out and inside and out so many different times that you just become really good at it yourself.
Agreed. Yeah, and I try to catch myself every time I think like, oh, this is difficult to explain. Because I don't know that I buy into that. I don't think anything should be difficult to explain if you know it well enough. You know.
Absolutely.
Within reason, most musical concepts, it can be simple if you really know them inside and out. You know.
Yeah. So explain dotted quarter notes to a third grader really quick. No.
Yeah. Well, you know.
Half of this value.
Is this a real question?
No, I'm just messing with you.
The beat that you hear when you're listening to a song, the beat that you want to dance to, you can split that up into 4 16th notes, and then you play each third one.
There you go. There it is, simple. Love it. Hey, so what spawned this was you posted a really cool thing on Instagram where you played a triple Radamacue, I believe, and you played them with open drags and closed drags, and beautifully played, beautifully executed. So, but I typed in, kind of crept into your DMs and was like, hey, I like them all. But you mentioned something about like the context of how it was played at that time, and so let's kind of dive into that. So
yeah, so.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
So basically, we kind of started talking, and you were surprised. And I don't know the final results because I kind of cut it off. I was like, "Let's do this podcast. Let's talk about it." But you were saying that you were surprised that most people chose the open interpretation of the drags, or the roughs, or however you want to call them, and the Radamacues. So, talk more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, for those who didn't see the post, that's probably most people. Basically, I played some roughs. I deliberately didn't show my hands because I wanted it to be about the sound, and I played some that sound like this, which we like to call open roughs. Open in the sense that you can actually hear all 3 notes within that. I'm like, you know, playing clearly articulated all the notes. And then I played some where the grace notes are buzzes, which we call closed. And just asked which one people like, you know, because I have my preferences and I have my thoughts about it, but I was curious aesthetically, like what are people actually into, you know? And yeah, about 90% to 10%, I would say, preferred open versus closed, which is interesting to me because, I mean, yeah, I'm sure we'll get into this stuff, but yeah, there's a lot of rudimental type things that I practice, the Rudimental Ritual by Alan Dawson and things like that, and I've always I prefer the sound of playing all those drags open, and even more so than that, let me make sure you can see it in my camera here, even more so like when I'm playing a drag, okay, you can throw down the stick and get 2 clear notes, but I like to take it one step further than that too, where I'm actually using the wrist for both of them. you know,
Yeah.
as much as humanly possible. So if I'm playing a drag, to me it feels like a left, left, right. I'm really like articulating that whole thing. Anything else has always made me feel fraudulent, which is not necessarily true, but that's, you know, it's something that we can talk about. And so I was curious where people, you know, what people thought about that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And you know, I think for me, when I was responding to that on a pad, I always prefer to open. You know, like it just, I feel like it just sounds better. You know, but on like a snare drum, when you get to a snare drum, that's where the buzz and the sound of the drum comes together. And if you have the closed interpretation on the snare drum, you have this zhum, zhum, instead of da-ga-dum, da-ga-dum. And it's this longer phrase in a way. So you know, like that's kind of where this happened, was because I was like, you know, on a snare drum, I think I might prefer this, but on the pad, I prefer the open drags.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You know, I try to not think about my technique so differently between the pad and the snare drum. I try, it's not the same, but I try to conceive of them the same way. But undeniably, the sound, right? You're dealing with resonance and snare wires that are at various different tensions. My drum is typically tuned pretty high with quite tight wires, and so in that sense, it's maybe as similar to a pad as you can get. And I just like the open sound, and you know, in terms of which one to teach and what it means to you know, what it means to teach open drags versus closed drags. I mean, that's something that I feel very passionately about. I told you this briefly. I mean, when I was growing up, I had some amazing teachers, but I remember, you know, I was kind of self-taught on my hand technique, and I was just figuring out what worked. And as all young students do, one day I discovered this thing where you can throw down and get 2 notes, or, you know, God forbid, even more, you know? And I thought, like, oh, great, I only have to play half my notes now. This drumming just got 50% easier.
Yeah, right.
This is wonderful, you know? And that was kind of my philosophy for playing as a young man. I mean, for, you know, 7-8 years of, you know, when I first got into Wilcoxon and things like that, it was all that. And nobody ever corrected me, you know? To the point where I was like 19, 20 years old in college, and I said, like, oh, you know, my hands are slow and weak. Like, yeah, like what happens if I want to play this drag on like a really deep floor tom, or what if I want to play it with the brushes or whatever? So this is something that now when I'm teaching, I try to be a little more firm on that side of it, where it's like young students will come up to me and they'll be like, oh, hey, I just discovered this thing. And okay, I'll go with it. I'll be like, yeah, you can do that. You can, if you push a little harder, you can get more notes out of it. You can get a buzz effect. But basically, it's cheating. Like, I would discourage you from trying to do that. And this is where it gets weird for me. It's not that I actually believe it's cheating. I don't. I just think that there's so many other drum teachers in the world who will just tell them, like, oh, you can just do this, and it's the same as anything else, and it's easier. So I just want to be that person who's like, no, don't do that. Yeah. That's wrong. You know what I mean? Because I don't think anybody else is gonna say that, or at least nobody else said it to me, and I think it set me way back early on.
Interesting.
You know? Yeah. These days, I like to think about teaching something that I like to call universal technique. So just playing in such a way, whether it's with the wrist or with the fingers, it doesn't really matter, that those notes will come out, whether it's on a practice pad or a snare drum, sticks, brushes, ride cymbal, floor tom, you know, those notes, you know. Yeah, I don't think of it as being harder to play rudiments with the brushes anymore, because I just use the same technique between sticks and brushes anyways, you know.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's where I'm at with it.
Speaking of technique, I find that triggering technique, right? So you see this with a lot of young students to get the doubles, right? Where the fingers just kind of triggering. I call this the trigger, and the fingers come off, and all of a sudden I can play rolls, you know.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, obviously that's not good. So I'm always, with my students, I'm always like, you make sure your fingers are firmly on the drumstick at all times, and control the strokes with your fingers and wrists.
Yeah.
And
maybe it's just the angle. Do you have like the tips of your fingers on the stick?
Well, for that demonstration I did, yeah. But normally
okay.
I'm more like this. Sometimes I'll grip like this, with the fulcrum being more on the middle finger as opposed to the index finger.
Okay, that's interesting. You're definitely more at the ends of the fingers than I tend to be. Almost like a clave grip. Eh?
Well, in a way. Also, these are giant marching sticks, so.
Okay, that too.
Regular drumstick. I try and be a little bit more on the pads of the fingers than back here in the fingers. And it's just again, My whole take on teaching and drums is that there is no one technique. If you think that if there's one way to do something, then we'd all be doing the same thing. So, like it's totally cool to have different techniques and different playing styles and different ways of doing things. I've come to grips with that with a lot of my students where I realize their hands kind of just don't work the same way as mine. Sometimes I have students that just can't get their wrist to do exactly what they need to do like this. And so they'll kind of come in like this. And so I'll let them do that until they have the realization that it has to be like this. So
yeah, okay.
It takes a little while sometimes for students. And sometimes it's a hill that, especially teaching for as long as I have, there's hills that I don't like to die on anymore.
Yeah.
Because in a way, as a teacher, you're supposed to inspire people, and so when I'm constantly harping on people, like, hey, your technique's wrong, or I'll let them get through something and just mention, hey, watch your hands when you're doing that, and then they instantly know, as opposed to me, it's like harping on technique. But going back to what you were saying too about, or just what we were talking about with grip. I tend to like the more open grip, the more delicate grip for a lot of playing, so like doing this more, keeping the pocket really open and then having the fulcrum being at the middle finger. I find that I get a lot of control doing that as opposed to doing this. In fact, at this point, my hands are like, I don't even like holding the drumstick like this anymore. Second pocket style. How about you? What's your grip doing these days?
Yeah, interesting. When I hold the stick like that, I definitely feel what you're talking about. There's a sense of, everything you do is coming from the wrist. So I appreciate that. I'm definitely, I'm a little deeper into the hand, I would say. When I see photos of myself, typically it's fairly tight most of the time, and I can really feel that muscle while I'm playing too. I mean, that squeeze is a key part of things for me. Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about so much because I was revisiting that Tony Williams clinic video where he's talking about holding at the back of the hand.
Yeah.
I cannot do it. It's so awesome. You know what I mean? But I try to take a step back and think about the philosophy. It's like, okay, if you do this, it means that you have to use the wrist, right? You can't really even use the fingers because they're busy holding the stick, and you certainly can't be trying to bounce the stick like that. So I do pinch a lot more from the front and wrap the fingers around and fairly tight in there. But other than that, I think philosophically, I kind of approach it the same way, where I'm really trying to control all the notes.
Yeah. When you're playing quiet, are you using more wrist strokes or are you using kind of delicate finger strokes? How are you playing those really delicate ghost strokes?
Yeah, it feels like wrist. It certainly feels like wrist when I'm playing quiet stuff on the pad. Yeah, like in my mind, in my brain, it feels like it's coming from down here. You know. But then when I watch the videos, I'm like, videos of myself playing, I'm like, okay, the fingers have something going on too. I'd be curious to know what you think about this actually, because I find it's maybe not that productive to try to separate the wrist and the fingers as two totally separate entities. Like I always find that they just work together anyways. But versus the beast that I'm trying to fight against is bouncing the stick off of the cymbal. You know what I mean? Like aside from that, you use the wrist, use the fingers. I'm using both for sure.
Yeah, I think your fingers can help control some of that bounce. Of course, that's especially when you're playing fast ride cymbal patterns. Your fingers and your wrists are going to work in conjunction because you can't. I mean, past like 400, you're not going ding 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 with your wrist. At least I'm not. I can't. So when I get up close to 400, I'm using a lot of bounce and I'm using my fingers and I'm using my wrist to make it all work together. Playing quietly, what I've been really into lately is just like playing the rudiment ritual at ridiculously low volumes.
Nice.
And just really honing in on that. Like when I practice, I like to practice in excess, right? So I like to practice quieter than I need to play. I don't. Playing loud is easy, so I don't practice too loud usually. But sometimes when you gotta let off steam, you hit the drums, right? But so when I'm practicing though, like I try and practice everything as controlled and as quiet as possible because I feel like, at least for me, that's an aspect of playing that a lot of people overlook is just how quiet you can play, with sticks. Because I want brushes to be a textural choice, not a dynamic choice. You know what I mean? So
and the same thing with like blast sticks. Totally. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. A sort of blessing that happened for me recently is I've been practicing at home now for about 2 months in a small apartment,
Yeah.
where I share walls with neighbors, and they're supportive and they're nice and everything. But as a result, I do try to play, very very quietly all the time. And it's been great,
Yeah.
because as you mentioned, I mean, you can turn up the volume. It's easier to play louder than it is to then bring it down, So yeah, so it's been fantastic, and
Yeah.
I haven't played the ritual super quiet in a while.
Yeah.
That's something I should get into.
It's fun. I do the same thing. So like part of my teaching, I teach in the style of Kenny Washington a lot of times. So I took a few lessons from him, and I got as much teaching information as I possibly could, right? And so I wasn't necessarily going to. It made me a better drummer, but I wasn't going there for myself. I was going there for my teaching, right? So one of the things that I learned was the huge dynamic control. So just playing the accent notes, like rolling in rhythm, but just that first 15 stroke roll, just making sure that those unaccented notes are as quiet as you can possibly make them. I couldn't play them quiet enough for Kenny. So,
Yes, I've had one lesson with him, and it was exactly that.
Yeah, right.
Incredible. And then he sits down and plays it, and it's like, oh, there you that's what it's supposed to sound like.
Yeah, no, that's the sauce right there, So I'm still constantly working on that stuff. Just being quiet.
And the way he had me practice it too, if I'm remembering right, I think he put on a metronome, and I was supposed to play one bar on and then one bar of rest, and repeat that first bar until it's perfect.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So like to practice, Paradiddle Johnny, page 2 of Wilcoxon, I mean that could take 30 minutes, just to get through it.
So, it's taken me 30 years now.
Yeah. Still on the third bar.
Yeah, man, I'm not there yet. No, and actually, you know what, man? That's it. That's one of the things that I just love about your content is that you're out there promoting Wilcox, and you're out there promoting Rudiment Ritual and all this stuff that I'm like, yes, thank you. I'm so glad it's gotten through to you, and you have such a good reach and everything, and like you're doing a great job with that. And that's obviously, I mean, it's the core to learning how to improvise on this instrument in the jazz style.
I agree. Well, yeah, thank you for noticing that. I think naturally because of my age, I tend to appeal to other people who are my age or younger, and so I'm trying to pass that stuff on to people who are like 16, and they're not going to hear it from other Instagram chop drummers, which is also great, you know what I mean? But just, that older style of education, which has always done something for me, I still feel my technique getting better every time I play the ritual, so yeah, I'll teach it for sure.
Absolutely. So speaking of the ritual, how often do you play it? Are you warming up with it, or what are you doing?
I try to play it every day, The way I play it, if I'm on a rudiment and I feel like I'm getting something out of it for the moment, I'll stick on it for a while, and so, it takes typically at least 30 minutes to get through, I would say, so I need some time. But typically I'll do the whole thing, I would say at least 5 times a week, something like that. It's a big thing for me.
Yeah, I usually I find that like playing the entire thing can dominate a practice session for me time-wise. So I usually stop around the paradiddle diddles. Is where I'm like, you know what, I'm good. Maybe I'll go on to the 4-stroke rolls, or the pair of flams or whatever. Then they start getting crazy with the flams and Arvin's diddles and all that stuff, right? But
some of the stuff is hard.
It's insane. Yeah. So for me, like if I'm trying to be really productive in my practice session, I'll try and limit it to 15, 20 minutes. That usually takes me to the paradiddles. And what are you varying the tempos? Like how often are you doing your rudiment ritualing? Are you like, do you sit down and say, hey, I did it at 150 today, tomorrow I'm going to do it at 200, or where are you at with all that?
I've been in a phase where I'm trying to get it fast right now. I'm curious how fast you can play it. I just did it at 185.
Okay.
That was my fastest. To the point where I can actually play everything, and my technique isn't falling apart and everything. As teaching, I mean, I try to be accountable. Like if the notes are coming out but it feels terrible and it sounds terrible, that doesn't count. Back it off. Yeah,
that's practicing, right? That's what you have to do. You have to recognize, you have to push your limits, figure out where your limits are, and then come back from those limits and refine, right?
So. And it can be honest too. I mean, be honest yeah, be honest with yourself about where you're at. Like,
Always.
you know, I have some beginner jazz drumming students who think they should be practicing 300 BPM. It's like, well, no, you know, you can barely play 190. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
Here's Freddie
just be
Freeloader.
honest
Figure
with
out some
where you
quarter
are.
notes first, guys. Come on.
That's right. And you know, I mean, I've been working a lot on fast tempos. I still don't feel like I'm at 400. I mean, it's not really. You know, 340. I feel like I have some stuff to say right now. That's sort of where I'm at.
Cool. Yeah, I remember. I would say I figured some of that out in college. I just worked it out. I was like, you know, here's 400 and whatever. I never play at 400 here in town. Like, like it's just it's just never comes up. As soon as you get over 280, people start griping over here. So,
Okay.
welcome to Sacramento. Sorry,
Okay.
everybody.
Okay.
Dropped you
It's
under
the West
bus.
Coast thing.
Yeah, it's a West Coast cool vibe, man. We're too cool.
That's
But,
right.
I got one other question for you. So we mentioned we were talking about roughs and drags. Which one is it?
Oh, interesting. Well, I don't know. If I was going to say rough, I would say 3-stroke rough, because I think you have to specify. Like a 4-stroke rough is a different thing, which I would assume as single strokes, a 4-stroke rough,
Right.
you know, versus a drag. The thing I just don't like that word drag, because to me it implies that you're dragging the stick across the drum, which is not what it is. You know what I mean? I'm gonna say 3-stroke rough, I guess, but I don't know. What do you think about it?
I think they're two different rudiments, right? So the 3-stroke rough and
Okay.
all those things are singles, and then the drags really are just doubles, right? So
oh, really? Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
that's my
That
take
makes a
on
lot
it.
of sense. Yeah, I guess I always thought the 3-stroke rough was a left, right, but no, what you're saying makes more sense.
No, it'd be right, left, right. You know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
actually,
okay.
and that's part of the problem with the nomenclature in the Drummers Complete vocabulary. I don't know how many versions you've taught through of that book with the rudiment ritual in it, but there's definitely a lot of like errors in it at times that you have to correct, like extra accents and things like that. But the first rudiment, it's written as the 3-stroke rough, but it's actually
Right.
a drag, just a single drag, right? So it's the single drag, then the single drag tap, and then the second ritual he calls the single drag, and then the third one is the double drag tap, but it's called the double drag, right? So it's just like a couple little idiosyncrasy things that kind of make everything kind of messed up, I guess, in the minds of everybody.
Yeah.
If that's your reference,
Sure.
you know, right? But awesome, man. Well, very cool. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about with this stuff? Anything else on your brain?
Well, I don't know exactly. I would just, you know, one thing I've been thinking about a lot is just that, you know, when I was coming up, I was searching for the easiest way to do something, and now, as I get a little older, I'm searching for the best way to do something, the clearest, you know, the way that presents the emotion that I'm trying to present, you know. Yeah, the way that sends to the audience this musical thought that I had, and very often that is not the easy way. You know what I mean? Which that can be a difficult pill to swallow. It's like people come up to me and say like, "Oh, well, wouldn't it be easier if you just did this?" Well, yeah, for sure it would be easy, but it would also be worse.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, and so just prioritizing the quality of the sound, even if it is more difficult. I mean, I don't know that drumming is supposed to be easy. What was it, Philly Joe, who said the P in practice stands for pain?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Yeah, so I just really love your philosophy and everything that you've been putting out there, and I just feel like you're really rooted in tradition, and you've got a lot of really great things to say, and you're reaching a great audience, and I'm just so stoked that you're part of this community. So.
Oh, well, stoked to be a part of it, and you know, like I said, thank you for inviting me on. It's like I just before this, I went onto your YouTube channel and I went to the old videos, and I was like, oh man, that was him too. Like, there's so many of these things I've seen before I knew who you were. You know? Yeah. Soloing
there's
with
a
rolls
few
on
out
the
there.
drums. That was like a long time ago.
Yeah, that was Yeah, it's so funny. Those videos I never put much thought into. I was just kind of like, I had a funny thing with that Soloing with Rolls video. It was lit up using a Harbor Freight halogen light, and so the room would just get so hot. It was like was just this heat producing lamp that was just, you know, a $20 light from Harbor Freight that was like blindingly light, and terrible, and then like a terrible Sony video camera, and yeah, but we made it
Yeah,
happen.
well, yeah, totally. We start somewhere. Maybe I'm crazy. I feel like LED lights were not that great back then. They all kind of
No,
looked
there
terrible,
weren't
right?
LED lights. That was halogen
right.
was like, I don't know if you've ever had a halogen light, but they are the hottest bulbs you can possibly get yourself in front of, and they like just emit rays of heat. So,
Okay.
and
Good
there
for
was a
Canadian
cage.
winters.
Yeah, they're so hot that they actually had a cage in front of them so like you wouldn't burn yourself touching them. Yeah.
And that was in your drum studio.
And that was in the studio, which was actually just a bedroom in my house that had curtains around it that made it look like a studio. So, awesome. Jacob, so where can people find you, and what are you doing next?
Yeah, all over the place. Instagram is where I'm the most active, I guess, at Jacob Wutzke. But I have a few things here on YouTube as well, and also on TikTok. And yeah, there's different things going on. Mostly, I'm playing with a wonderful jazz vocalist named Katie George. We have a couple dates in Canada that I'm excited about next month, and I'm also releasing some music under my own name. I have this duo project with just drums and saxophone, which is
Very cool.
cool and unusual, you know.
Now, is
yeah.
that the project that you were doing where it kind of has that spatial audio thing where you kind of...
It's the same thing. Yeah.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Neat.
Yeah, I figured it's like drums and saxophone are so different sonically anyways. Like you'll hear both of us kind of no matter what you do with the mixing, and so we decided to take a little bit of a risk with it and record with some unusual microphones, and yeah, it's a cool thing.
I think that's really neat. Pushing the boundaries.
Yeah, try my best.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you on the next one. Keep looking out for Jacob out here. He's going to be crushing it here very soon with all the greats and all the festivals and everything. So,
Cheers. Thank you, Tim.
all right, man. Take care.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.